Evening and welcome to RFL. I'm Richard French. Thanks for joining us. A great show tonight, including fascinating stories from around our region, including a mayor who regretted not speaking up for those who couldn't speak for themselves, to a nun giving second chances to women behind bars. We'll have much more, but first, let's now bring in Karen Tryers live with unfolding situation out of the Ukraine.
Good evening. Pro-Russia rebels are guarding the site where Malaysia Airlines Flight 17 crashed in eastern Ukraine, but they are letting some reporters on the scene. One of my ABC News colleagues is there, and he reports that amidst the charred wreckage of the plane, some everyday items remain intact, including a travel guide, a child's backpack, all reminders of just how evil this act was. A steady rain fell over the crash site of Malaysia Airlines Flight 17. An ABC reporter on the scene said the smell of jet fuel and death were overwhelming. As officials sifted through the wreckage, more details emerged about the 298 passengers on board.
Men, women, children, infants, who had nothing to do with the crisis in Ukraine.
There was at least one American, Quinn Lucas Shansman, a U.S.-Dutch dual citizen. Also on board, as many as 108 AIDS activists, researchers, and health workers heading to a major conference in Australia, including Glenn Thomas from the World Health Organization.
Glenn will be remembered for his ready laugh and his passion for public health.
U.S. officials said today it was a single missile from a complex Russian-made anti-aircraft system that hit the jet, fired from an area of Ukraine controlled by Russian separatists. But the key questions are who shot down the plane and why. President Obama laid the ultimate blame squarely on Russia.
A group of separatists can't shoot down military transport planes, or they claim shoot down fighter jets without sophisticated equipment and sophisticated training, and that is coming from Russia.
Experts say the key now is to keep the crash scene as intact as possible, so evidence is not contaminated or compromised.
The real key here is to get to the site and to look at the forensic evidence on the skin of the aircraft.
President Obama called for an immediate ceasefire in eastern Ukraine so a credible international investigation can get underway. Reporting live from Washington, Karen Travers, ABC News. Back to you.
Thank you, Karen. Now, Russian rebels shot down 2 Ukrainian military aircraft with missiles this week, and officials believe the rebels shot down the commercial plane, but it looks at this point accidentally. But nonetheless, this has the fingerprints, it seems, of the rebels. Now, video of an alleged audio recording between the rebels appeared online just minutes after the plane was knocked out of the sky.
По телевизору передают вроде бы как этот Ан-26 украинский транспортник, но говорят написано на нем малазийские авиалинии. И что он делал на территории Украины?
Ну, значит, завозили шпионов, их нахуй, понял? Не хуй летать, сейчас война идет, блядь.
Понял.
Now, former President Bill Clinton, he spoke out about the tragedy and said a group of AIDS researchers not only were on the flight, but he also said they were doing so much good. Meanwhile, New York Congressman Peter King says if Russia were involved, action must be taken against Russian President Vladimir Putin.
As a major world power, Russia cannot be guilty of that type of criminal negligence. They have to pay a price for that. This is some third world banana republic we're talking about. We're talking about Russia. We're talking about Putin. And he has to take responsibility. He has to be held accountable. And we should, I believe, start with embargoes. We should start doing whatever we can do economically and get our Western allies to show some guts and go along with us. And we have to become energy independent.
So it's awful. I mean, those people are... They're really, in a way, martyrs to the cause. It was sickening.
All right, I want to bring in a panel led by Congressman Eliot Engel of New York, representing the 16th District, ranking member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, Dominic Carter, of course, and Andrew Whitman. Both join us as well. And Congressman, thanks for the time. I want to go around the globe here a little bit, if you will, and let's start off in the Ukraine. By all intents and purposes, it looks like this was certainly at the hand of the rebels here, whether it was accidentally or not. The broader question then becomes who trained them, who gave them, and was there any coordination with the Russians? Step this out for me. Even if we can't find a smoking gun that directly links Russia to them, nobody seems to debate here that these guys were not only of Russian origin, but certainly there was training. There's even video supporting that. Question then becomes, what can and should we as the United States do about it?
Well, you know, I came back from Ukraine about 2 months ago and visited some of the towns in the east. I think the United States really needs to stand with the people of Ukraine in trying to repel the pro-Russian secessionists in the eastern part of Ukraine.
How?
Well, this is just another incident. Let me just say the plane is just another incident. It isn't an isolated incident. It's another incident of all kinds of things that are happening. Putin, of course, invaded and annexed Crimea. He's playing games in terms of possibly doing that to other swaths of eastern Ukraine. And, you know, we're in a negotiation now with Iran, and Iran's at the negotiating table because we imposed sanctions that brought them to their knees. I think it's time to seriously consider stronger sanctions against Russia. No one wants to get into a ground war or anything like that. But I think that Putin has to be hurt in his pocketbook. The Russian economy is fragile, and he's got to understand that NATO's not going to stand for this. I think this is a great test for the NATO alliance. I think the future of NATO is really hanging in the balance. When the Soviet Union collapsed, there was serious question about whether NATO would remain or whether we won the Cold War, let's just disband NATO. And it was decided that NATO should remain intact and indeed even expand, which it has, so that many of the former Eastern Bloc countries that used to be aligned with the Soviet Union are now members of NATO. Those countries are as nervous as can be. I speak with their ambassadors all the time, with their foreign ministers all the time. They're really, really worried, and we need to assure them that we're not going to let Putin be a bully and continue to get away with these things with no repercussion.
But will the rest of Europe be willing, literally, to put the money where their mouth is? Because we even saw a completion of a sale as early as today with another European nation and Russia over an arms project. And my question is, it's one thing if we put stricter embargoes and sanctions on them, but if nobody else follows, what is an empty threat?
Well, you're right. You know, France has contracted, before any of this happened, to sell two Mistral amphibious boats to Russia. That's exactly not what the French should be doing. But on the other hand, they have a contract. I've proposed that NATO buy those boats,
yep.
Or that we figure out another way for some other entity to buy those boats, so that the French companies wouldn't lose the contract, but that Russia wouldn't get into Russian hands. We have to work in conjunction with our allies, and of course, our allies, many of them, Germany, Britain, they get a lot of their energy needs from Russia, and so they're reluctant to go against the Russians. Shows again why the U.S. has to be become more energy efficient, and why we have to ultimately, sooner rather than later, be a net exporter of energy, so that we can sell energy to these countries and not have them rely on Putin. But I can tell you that these countries that are on the cusp, you know, countries like Georgia and countries like Moldova and Ukraine, which all signed agreements with the European Union just a couple of weeks ago, they are very, very nervous, and we have to show leadership. And I think that the whole calculus of NATO over the past 15 or 20 years now has to change, because the calculus was based on the fact that Russia was looked upon as a partner. Russia is now an adversary, and we have to make sure that NATO is formulated now on the basis of that adversarial role. And finally, about NATO, in the Charter it says that every country who's a member of NATO must use 2% of their budget for defense purposes. Only 4 countries of all the NATO, there are 20-some-odd NATO countries, only 4 are up to that 2%. We have to ensure that other countries really get up to that, so that we show a reformulation and united front.
United front, exactly.